Her voice could make an entire nation dream of a place over the rainbow. That same voice masked a nightmare orchestrated by the most powerful man in Hollywood. This is the tragic story of Judy Garland, the beloved star, and Louis B. Mayer, the ruthless head of MGM who controlled her. You are about to learn the shocking, systemic abuse that broke a young girl's spirit to build an icon. We will uncover how a studio contract became a cage, how pills replaced parenting, and how psychological warfare was standard practice. What is the true cost of the Hollywood dream we all cherish? Hollywood in the 1930s was a kingdom of its own making, and the studio bosses were its absolute monarchs. No studio shone brighter or wielded more power than Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, often called the Tiffany's of the film industry. Its leader, Louis B. Mayer, didn't just run a company. He presided over a factory of dreams, and he believed every product, every star, belonged to him. Under the studio system, actors were not employees. They were property, bound by ironclad contracts that gave the studio control over every conceivable part of their existence. What roles they played, what they wore in public, who they were seen with, even who they might marry, all of it could be dictated from the executive office. This was the glittering, gilded cage, a world of immense wealth and suffocating control. And into this cage, at the age of just 13, walked a girl named Frances Gumm, who the world would soon know as Judy Garland. The fame she would achieve was unimaginable, but the price was her entire childhood, her health, and any semblance of personal freedom. The system was designed to manufacture icons, and it would do so without any regard for the human being at its center. From the moment she could walk, Frances Gumm was on stage. Born into a family of vaudeville performers, her childhood was the smell of grease paint and the sound of rolling train wheels, moving from one theater to the next. Her parents, especially her ambitious mother Ethel, saw something extraordinary in their youngest daughter, a voice far bigger than her small frame. They pushed her relentlessly, and Frances, who loved the applause more than anything, pushed herself harder. By the time she was a young teenager, the Gumm sisters' act had evolved, and Frances, now using the stage name Judy Garland, was its undeniable star. Her voice was a force of nature, rich, emotional, and impossibly mature. It was this voice that led her to an audition at the mightiest dream factory of all, MGM, for the man who held all the keys, Louis B. Mayer. The meeting was not a fairy tale. Mayer looked at the 13-year-old girl, not yet polished by studio glamour, and saw only what she was not. He reportedly called her a little hunchback, a cruel dismissal of her ordinary appearance. In that moment, he didn't see a prodigy, he saw a problem. But then Judy sang, and everything changed. The raw, powerful emotion that poured out of her was undeniable, a talent so pure it cut through Mayer's harsh judgment. He signed her immediately, yet that first insult planted a poisonous seed. From day one, Judy Garland entered Hollywood not as a celebrated discovery, but as a flawed piece of clay that the studio needed to fix. Her immense gift had saved her, but it also sentenced her to a life of being told she was never quite good enough as she was. Louis B. Mayer was a man who built his own legend from the ground up. He began not in a glittering office, but in the gritty world of scrap metal, buying and selling the discarded pieces of other people's dreams. That sharp, unforgiving business taught him the value of raw material and the immense profit in reshaping it. He carried that mentality directly into Hollywood, where he didn't just help build a studio. He built an empire that reflected his own towering ego and iron will. Publicly, Mayer cultivated the image of a benevolent patriarch. He spoke of MGM as one big, happy family, with himself as the loving father. He hosted lavish holiday parties, handed out bonuses, and presented himself as a moral guardian for America, championing wholesome, family-friendly entertainment. This was the myth he sold to the world, and to a great extent, the public and his stars wanted to believe it. The private reality, witnessed by those under his control, was something far darker. Behind closed doors, Mayer was a master manipulator, capable of terrifying rage and calculated cruelty. His temper was legendary, a force that could reduce grown men and women to tears. He ruled through a toxic blend of overwhelming generosity and psychological terror, knowing that keeping someone off balance was the key to total control. His famous motto was that MGM had more stars than there are in heaven. It was a brilliant marketing line, but it revealed his true philosophy. Stars were not artists to be nurtured. They were products to be manufactured, assets on a balance sheet. The process was industrial. Find the raw talent, strip away its original identity, reshape it to fit a marketable image, and polish it until it shone for the public. The dark side of this process was the complete disregard for the human cost. If a piece of raw material showed cracks under the pressure of constant work, public scrutiny, and impossible standards, the solution was not to ease the pressure. It was to apply a chemical patch, a pill to keep the machine running. The family he claimed to lead was, in truth, a system of absolute ownership, where love was conditional on obedience and box office returns. This was the man who now held the future of a 13-year-old Judy Garland in his hands. He saw not a child, but a unique piece of raw material, one with a voice that could mint money, and a spirit he believed needed to be broken and remade. The contract Judy Garland signed was not a ticket to stardom. It was a legal surrender. On the dotted line, her mother Ethel Gumm, acting as guardian, bound her 13-year-old daughter to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer for a period of 7 long years. This was not a unique document, but the standard MGM contract, a masterpiece of corporate control disguised as an opportunity. It granted the studio the absolute right to dictate every hour of Judy's life. They could assign her to as many as 6 films a year, with rehearsals, costume fittings, and promotional duties filling every waking moment in between. They controlled her public image, approving or denying every photograph, every public appearance, even her hairstyle and weight. Financially, the arrangement was equally binding. Judy was placed on a weekly salary, a sum that seemed generous for a child from a struggling vaudeville family, but it was a fraction of the millions her work would generate for the studio. The vast majority of her earnings were kept by MGM, with Judy herself seeing only that set weekly amount, regardless of how successful her films became. This system was anchored by something called the option clause. The contract was not for a firm 7 years from Judy's perspective, but for 6 months at a time. Every 6 months, MGM had the option to renew her contract or to drop her entirely, with no reason required. This single clause created a state of perpetual anxiety. A star's entire career, their income, their home, their sense of security, hung on a decision made in a distant office every 180 days. It was a powerful tool for enforcing compliance. Step out of line, question a role, or show any sign of being difficult, and you could be dropped, your livelihood vanishing overnight. For a child like Judy, this legal framework was the architecture of her captivity. Her childhood, her time, her talent, and her financial future were no longer her own. They were corporate assets, managed by Louis B. Mayer. This document transformed the fatherly image Mayer projected into a legally enforceable reality. He was not just a boss. He was, on paper, the ultimate authority over a young girl's life. The signature on that page was the moment the cage door clicked shut, locking Judy into a system designed to work her to the point of exhaustion, while ensuring she would never have the power to walk away. The contract ensured her obedience, but her body became the next battleground. As Judy Garland grew from a child into a young woman, the studio's carefully crafted image of her faced a new threat: her natural adolescent development. During the filming of The Wizard of Oz, when Judy was just 16 years old, Louis B. Mayer and the studio executives looked at their young star and saw a problem. They decided her figure was not the petite, childlike shape they wanted for Dorothy, or for the ingenue roles they had planned for her future. In their view, her body was simply another element of production that needed to be controlled. The solution was not a nutritionist or a sensible exercise plan. It was chemical intervention. Studio doctors, acting on orders from the highest levels, prescribed Judy a brutal regimen of pills. To suppress her appetite and maintain her energy through 18-hour workdays on the Oz set, she was given amphetamines, known then as pep pills. These drugs wired her nervous system, allowing her to perform take after exhausting take with a bright, artificial energy. But the human body cannot sustain that state. So, to bring her down from the chemical high and force her to sleep, the same doctors prescribed barbiturates, powerful sedatives. This created a devastating cycle she would never escape. Wake up with an upper, power through the day in a state of stimulated anxiety, then crash with a downer, only to repeat the process the next morning. This was not a secret, backroom arrangement. It was a medically sanctioned system of abuse. The very people entrusted with her health were weaponizing it for the studio's schedule. Imagine being a teenager, already under immense pressure to carry a multi-million-dollar film, and being told by authority figures that your natural body is wrong, that you need pills to be acceptable. The message was corrosive. You are not right as you are. This regime did more than jumpstart a lifelong addiction. It taught Judy that her own sensations, her hunger, her fatigue, her emotions, were not to be trusted or managed with care, but to be chemically erased for the convenience of the machine. The yellow brick road was paved with pills, and the journey broke her metabolism and her relationship with her own body before she ever left the lot. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. For teenage Judy Garland, a typical schedule was not measured in hours of work, but in precious minutes of rest snatched between obligations. An 18-hour day was not an exception, it was the standard. She would arrive on the soundstage at 5 in the morning, already in costume and makeup, to film musical numbers that required endless, physically demanding takes. By afternoon, she might be rushed to a recording studio to lay down tracks for a future film, her voice pushed to its limits. Evenings were often filled with live radio broadcasts, a key part of studio promotion, where she had to perform with flawless, cheerful energy for a national audience. And after that, there were wardrobe fittings for the next film, or script readings, or publicity photo shoots under blinding lights. Sunday was rarely a day off. It was simply another day in the production cycle. This was not a temporary crunch. It was the unrelenting tempo of her adolescence. Consider the specific crucible of filming The Wizard of Oz, while embodying Dorothy Gale, a role that required a profound emotional openness and childlike wonder. Judy was simultaneously working on other projects. She would finish a grueling day on the Oz set, a day spent following the yellow brick road for the 12th time under scorching lights, only to be whisked away to rehearse for her next film or record songs for another. The studio saw no conflict in this. They owned her time completely. The physical toll was immense, but the psychological pressure was worse. She was a teenager carrying the weight of a multi-million-dollar production on her shoulders, with executives like Louis B. Mayer watching every dailies, judging every performance. The message was constant. The entire machinery of MGM depended on her not breaking, on her delivering perfection take after take, day after endless day. This inhuman pace created the very dependency the studio then supplied. The exhaustion was so deep, so bone-crushing, that the pills were no longer a choice. They were a necessity for basic function. The amphetamines were the only thing that could cut through the fog of sleep deprivation, forcing her nervous system into a state of alertness she could no longer muster on her own. The barbiturates were the only tool that could override the adrenalized anxiety of that artificial energy and grant her a few hours of unconsciousness. The system was perfectly, horribly self-reinforcing. The studio's demand for impossible hours created a physical collapse, which their doctors then medicated, which allowed them to demand even more. Her body and mind became a factory floor, kept operational through chemical means. The bright-eyed girl singing about bluebirds was, in reality, a chronically exhausted teenager running on pharmaceutical fumes, her own natural rhythms utterly destroyed by the machine that needed her to never, ever stop. The chemical control was only one layer of the abuse. More insidious was the psychological warfare waged against her mind, a campaign that began the very day Louis B. Mayer first laid eyes on her. He never let her forget that initial, brutal assessment. In private meetings and even in front of others, Mayer would refer to Judy as his little hunchback. It was a cruel, calculated nickname meant to keep her perpetually off balance and grateful for his patronage. He systematically attacked her appearance, telling her she was unattractive, that her nose was wrong, her figure was never quite right. He would point to other starlets on the MGM lot, like the stunning Lana Turner, held up as the platinum standard of Hollywood beauty. "Look at her," he would say to Judy. "That is what a star looks like. You will never be that." Now imagine hearing this as a teenage girl, already under the microscope of global fame. Every magazine, every fan letter, every studio publicist was telling her she was a beloved star. But the one man whose opinion dictated her entire career, the patriarchal figure who controlled her fate, was telling her the opposite. He was planting a seed of profound dissonance. The world saw Dorothy, but Mayer ensured Judy saw only the flaws. This was not casual criticism. It was a deliberate strategy. By convincing her she was inherently lacking, Mayer made her dependent on his approval and the studio's machinery to fix her. It ensured she would work twice as hard to prove her worth, and it made her less likely to rebel or demand better treatment, because in her mind, she didn't deserve it. The result was a deep-seated insecurity that no amount of applause could ever silence. She could receive a standing ovation and still hear Mayer's voice in her head, telling her she was not beautiful, not good enough. This erosion of self-worth from such a young age created a void that fame could never fill. It turned her natural nervousness before a performance into crippling stage fright, and her desire for love into a series of desperate, often tragic, relationships. The pills managed her body, but Mayer's words broke her spirit, ensuring that the brightest star in the MGM heavens always felt like she was on the verge of burning out. The studio's control over her body extended far beyond the medicine cabinet. Every morning, before Judy Garland could even step in front of a camera, she was subjected to a physical transformation that was both painful and humiliating. The MGM wardrobe department, under direct orders, became an instrument of body modification. To maintain the illusion of a perpetual, girlish innocence, they employed a brutal arsenal of undergarments designed not to flatter, but to constrain and reshape. As Judy developed into a young woman, they used heavy canvas corsets and tight binding cloth to forcibly flatten her chest. Her waist was cinched to an unnatural degree, and her hips were padded or minimized to create a childlike silhouette that contradicted her own biology. This was not a one-time costume for a specific role. This was her daily reality for years, a routine as standard as putting on makeup. Imagine starting a 14-hour workday already struggling to breathe deeply, your ribs compressed, your natural form declared an enemy of the image you were paid to project. The discomfort was constant, a physical reminder that she, as she was unacceptable. The message was reinforced with every pinched seam and tightened strap. You are not right. You must be corrected. You must be contained. This relentless physical manipulation did more than cause aches. It cemented a profound disconnect between Judy and her own body. The very source of her power, her breath support for that legendary voice, was literally being restricted by the garments meant to make her presentable. The studio sold America the dream of the girl next door, but they built that dream on a foundation of daily, sanctioned discomfort, teaching their star that her own skin was a costume she was never allowed to wear. Yet even her personal life was not her own. The studio's control extended far beyond the soundstage and the doctor's office, reaching into the most intimate corners of her existence. To keep Judy Garland pliable and focused solely on her work, Louis B. Mayer and MGM's publicity department orchestrated a campaign of calculated isolation. They understood a fundamental truth. A star with no outside support system is a star who must rely entirely on the studio for everything, from career advice to simple companionship. This strategy began with her family. While Judy's mother, Ethel, was initially a constant presence, the studio gradually worked to minimize her influence, viewing her as a potential complication. More deliberately, they controlled Judy's social world. Genuine friendships with other young actors on the lot were actively discouraged, especially if those peers were seen as rebellious or a bad influence. The message was clear: your peers are not your friends, they are your competition. Instead of organic relationships, the studio manufactured artificial ones. Judy's dates were often publicity stunts, arranged with handsome young contract players like Mickey Rooney. Photographers would be tipped off, and the pair would be seen laughing at a premiere or sharing a soda at a malt shop, all to feed the fan magazines and sustain a wholesome, all-American image. These were not romantic connections, they were business assignments. Any hint of a real, unapproved relationship was swiftly and firmly quashed. The goal was to make the MGM family the only family that mattered. The mayor himself would alternate between the terrifying boss and the comforting father figure, creating a dizzying psychological trap. After a brutal day of criticism, he might summon her to his office, offer a sympathetic ear, and present her with an extravagant gift, like a piece of jewelry. This cycle of cruelty and reward made him the central source of both her pain and her validation. Who could she turn to if she felt lonely or confused? Not her family, who were kept at a distance. Not her peers, who were painted as rivals. Only Mayer and the studio executives held the answers, the approval, and the keys to her future. They systematically stripped away every possible external anchor, ensuring that Judy's entire emotional world, her sense of worth and belonging, was contained within the studio walls. Her loneliness was not an accident, it was corporate policy. A dependent star is a compliant star, and Judy Garland was left with nowhere to look for love or support, except toward the very people who were exploiting her. Her voice was the reason for everything, and so it became the source of her greatest torment. Louis B. Mayer saw Judy Garland's extraordinary talent not as a gift to be cherished, but as a natural resource to be mined without limit. That voice, capable of conveying heartbreaking vulnerability and soaring joy, was the engine of the MGM machine, and it was expected to perform on command, regardless of the human cost. On set, the demand for perfection was absolute. A single musical number could require 30, 40, even 50 takes. The director, the choreographer, the sound technicians, and ultimately Louis B. Mayer himself would scrutinize every note, every breath, every step. If her energy flagged, if a single high note wavered by the 20th take, the response was not understanding, it was frustration. Time was money, and a recalcitrant vocal cord was a mechanical failure holding up production. This pressure did not lift when she was unwell. Judy was frequently forced to perform with severe colds, with fevers, even with strep throat, her vocal cords inflamed and raw. The studio doctors would simply administer more medication, numbing sprays to temporarily silence the pain, so the recording could proceed. Her body's warning signals were treated as inconveniences to be chemically subdued. This relentless grind forged a terrifying equation in her young mind. Her worth, her right to exist within the studio walls, was directly tied to her ability to produce that flawless sound on cue. If the voice failed, she believed she would be worthless. This instilled a paralyzing fear of failure that would haunt her long after she left MGM. It transformed her natural pre-performance nerves into debilitating stage fright, a dread that the magic might simply vanish one night, confirming every cruel thing Mayer had ever implied about her. Consequently, she developed a workaholic mentality that defined her entire life. She did not know how to stop, because stopping meant confronting the void where her self-esteem should have been. The applause of an audience became the only antidote to the critical voice in her head, driving her to accept punishing schedules and push herself to the brink, again and again. The very thing that made her special was systematically turned against her, creating a lifelong cycle where the pursuit of artistic perfection was inextricably linked to a profound fear of being fundamentally and fatally flawed. While the world saw a superstar, Judy Garland's bank account told a very different story. Her financial reality was a masterclass in studio-era exploitation, a system designed to ensure the talent never truly profited from their own labor. Judy was one of the biggest box office draws in the world, her films generating tens of millions for MGM, yet her compensation remained a fixed weekly salary. At the peak of her fame, following the colossal success of The Wizard of Oz and Meet Me in St. Louis, she was earning about $2,000 a week. This was a fortune to the average person, but it was a pittance compared to the revenue she generated. More insidiously, this salary was not pure income. It was merely an advance against her future earnings, which were meticulously whittled down to nothing by the studio's creative accounting. This process was known as charging expenses back to the star. Every single cost associated with Judy Garland was deducted from her paycheck before she ever saw a dime. The elaborate costumes from her films, the lavish sets, the studio makeup artists and hairdressers who worked on her, even the limousines sent to bring her to the lot, all of it was itemized and billed to her personal studio account. Most shockingly, this included the very pills that were destroying her health. The amphetamines and barbiturates prescribed by the studio doctors were not provided as health care. They were logged as a business expense and charged back to Judy. She was literally paying for her own addiction, funding the chemical regime that kept her working. The studio operated like a company town from a grim industrial past, where the worker owes their soul to the company store. No matter how hard she worked, the debt always seemed to grow. She had no financial literacy, no manager of her own to scrutinize the books, and no power to question the studio's opaque accounting. Her mother, Ethel, who handled her affairs early on, was equally outmatched by MGM's legal and financial machinery. The result was that Judy Garland, a global icon, was perpetually in debt to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. She lived in a beautiful home provided by the studio, wore gorgeous clothes lent by the studio, and existed in a gilded bubble entirely financed by the studio, which meant she never truly owned anything. This financial captivity was the final, unbreakable chain. Even if she had found the courage to walk away from the psychological torment and physical abuse, the economic reality would have stopped her cold. She owed them money, a sum that the studio's accountants could always justify. It made her utterly dependent, ensuring that her only path to solvency was to keep working, to keep singing, to keep taking the pills and enduring the criticism. Her talent built an empire, but the empire's books were rigged to show she was its indentured servant, forever working to pay off a debt that was designed to never be cleared. The transition from girl to woman was a crisis the studio had long dreaded. For years, Louis B. Mayer had profited from Judy Garland's unique appeal, a childlike innocence paired with a shockingly mature voice. But as she entered her late teens and early 20s, that very innocence became a liability. Mayer and MGM faced a dilemma they had engineered themselves. They had sold America on Judy as the eternal girl next door, the wide-eyed dreamer from Kansas. What happens when that girl grows up? In Mayer's view, it was a commercial catastrophe. He feared, perhaps correctly from a cynical marketing standpoint, that a mature Judy Garland would confuse audiences and shatter the lucrative image they had spent millions to build. His solution was not to guide her evolution, but to fight it with everything he had. He was determined to keep her frozen in time, a perpetual adolescent in a world that was leaving her behind. This refusal to let her grow up created a profound and painful professional stagnation. While her peers like Lana Turner and Elizabeth Taylor were graduating to sophisticated, glamorous roles, Judy was still being shoved into juvenile parts. She was forced to play teenagers well into her 20s, wearing the same restrictive costumes and singing bubbly songs that no longer matched her life experience or her deepening voice. The dissonance was humiliating. On set, she was treated like a child, yet she was expected to carry the workload and pressure of a top-tier adult star. This professional purgatory mirrored her trapped personal state perfectly. In her life, she was isolated, medicated, and controlled. In her career, she was infantilized, typecast, and denied artistic growth. The roles offered no outlet for the complex woman she was becoming, a woman who had known immense pressure, heartache, and exhaustion. She yearned to be taken seriously, to play dramatic parts that reflected her own emotional depth. But the studio gatekeepers, led by Mayer, dismissed those ambitions. They saw her only as a singing commodity, not as an actress capable of range. This stagnation bred a desperate frustration. How do you prove your maturity when the most powerful man in your world insists you remain a child? Every script for another musical about a plucky ingenue felt like a sentence, a confirmation that she would never be allowed to escape the gilded cage of her own stardom. The little girl from The Wizard of Oz was gone, but the studio refused to bury her, forcing the woman to wear her ghost. At the age of 19, Judy Garland saw a door out of her gilded cage, and his name was David Rose. Rose was a successful composer and bandleader, a charming, older man who represented everything the studio was not: sophistication, independence, and a life beyond the MGM lot. Their whirlwind romance felt like a real-world fairy tale to Judy, a chance to finally be seen as a woman, not a studio asset. She believed marriage would grant her the autonomy she craved, a home of her own making, and a partner who loved her for herself, not her box office numbers. It was a desperate, hopeful lunge toward normalcy, a declaration that she was an adult capable of making her own choices. To Louis B. Mayer, however, this was not a love story. It was a direct rebellion. A husband represented a rival authority, a new loyalty that could threaten the studio's absolute control. Mayer saw David Rose not as a suitor, but as a kidnapper attempting to steal his most valuable property. The studio's opposition was immediate and vicious. Mayer summoned Judy and launched into a tirade, warning her that marriage would destroy her career, that the public would reject a married Dorothy, that she was throwing her life away. When emotional pleas failed, the studio shifted to tactics of sabotage. They weaponized the very tool they had always used to control her schedule. Immediately after the wedding, MGM buried the newlyweds under an avalanche of work. Judy was assigned to back-to-back films, recordings, and promotional tours. Her days meticulously planned to leave no room for a marriage to breathe. David Rose, whose own career required travel and evening performances, found it nearly impossible to see his wife. The studio ensured their time together was scarce, strained, and conducted in the exhausting aftermath of 18-hour workdays. Furthermore, the studio's publicity machine, which had once manufactured fake dates for her, now worked to undermine her real marriage. They planted stories in gossip columns, questioning the union's stability and fueling rumors. The constant interference and engineered separation created inevitable tension. Two people who barely had a chance to build a foundation found themselves struggling against a powerful, invisible force determined to pull them apart. The marriage, a fragile lifeboat launched into a storm of the studio's making, quickly capsized. It lasted less than 2 years. The divorce was a devastating personal failure for Judy, but it was a resounding victory for Louis B. Mayer, it proved his terrifying point that without the studio, she had nothing. Her attempt to claim an independent life had ended in ruin, seemingly confirming her deepest fear that she was unlovable outside the context of her stardom. She returned to the lot, emotionally battered and more financially dependent than ever, her brief rebellion crushed. The message was now carved in stone. There was no escape from MGM. The breaking point arrived not with a scream, but with a silence, an empty space on a soundstage where a star was supposed to be. In 1944, Judy Garland was cast in The Clock, a dramatic romance that was a deliberate departure from musicals. She was thrilled, finally being trusted with a serious, adult role opposite Robert Walker. But the very opportunity she had longed for became the stage for her collapse. The punishing years of chemical dependency and sleepless nights had frayed her nerves to a thread. The pressure to prove herself in this new genre was immense, and her body, long abused by uppers and downers, began to revolt. She started arriving late to the set, not out of defiance, but from a paralyzing inability to get out of bed, a deep chemical depression no amount of pep pills could pierce. When she did arrive, she was often visibly trembling, her focus scattered, her lines forgotten. There were days when she simply could not perform, overwhelmed by anxiety and exhaustion. The production, meticulously scheduled and budgeted, began to falter. Louis B. Mayer's response was not one of medical concern or paternal worry. It was pure, incandescent fury. To him, this was not a human being in crisis. It was a malfunctioning piece of equipment holding up a multi-million-dollar assembly line. He saw the delays not as symptoms of suffering, but as acts of sabotage against his studio. Mayer reportedly stormed onto the set, berating Judy in front of the cast and crew. He framed her struggle as a moral failing, a lack of professionalism and gratitude. Where a doctor might have seen a severe addiction, Mayer saw only willful unreliability. This moment was a pivotal, cruel redefinition. The narrative shifted irrevocably. Judy Garland was no longer MGM's hardworking little star who needed guidance. She was now a problem, a label that would haunt her for the rest of her career. She was branded as difficult, as unreliable, as hysterical. These words became a weapon used to justify every harsh treatment that followed, and to absolve the studio of any responsibility for creating the conditions that led to her breakdown. The very system that had pumped her full of drugs to meet its demands now punished her for being dependent on them. Her attempt to grow up on screen had revealed the fragile foundation upon which her stardom was built, and the man who built it had no interest in repairs, only in assigning blame. The suspension was a public execution of her career. Following the turmoil on the clock, Judy was cast in The Harvey Girls, a vibrant musical meant to be a return to form. But the damage was too deep. The familiar cycle of chemical exhaustion and paralyzing anxiety returned, and she began missing work again. The studio's response was swift and brutal. A Metro-Goldwyn mayor officially suspended Judy Garland without pay. This was not a quiet administrative leave. It was a spectacular punishment designed to humiliate. For the first time since she was 13 years old, her weekly salary, the financial lifeline that kept her in debt and dependent, was severed. The studio cut off her income to prove a terrifying point: that everything she had, from the roof over her head to the food on her table, was a gift from MGM that could be revoked in an instant. It was a masterstroke of corporate cruelty, leveraging her financial captivity to force submission. Without that paycheck, she could not pay her bills or her mounting debts to the studio itself. The suspension was a calculated move to break her spirit through economic terror, to make her so desperate that she would crawl back, begging for work on any terms they set. But the financial blow was only half the strategy. Simultaneously, the studio's powerful publicity machine shifted into high gear, launching a campaign to control the narrative. Stories began leaking to Hollywood columnists and fan magazines. The whispers painted a very specific picture. Judy Garland was not a young woman in the grips of a health crisis fostered by the studio. She was a spoiled, temperamental star who simply refused to work. She was framed as ungrateful, hysterical, and difficult. Headlines questioned her professionalism and her sanity. This public relations assault served a critical purpose. It shifted all blame from the abusers to the victim. By painting Judy as the problem, MGM insulated itself from any scrutiny. The public and the industry would not ask why a 22-year-old woman was addicted to pills and unable to function. They would simply shake their heads at another troubled starlet who could not handle fame. It was a devastating act of gaslighting on a national scale. The very institution that had pumped her full of drugs, worked her to collapse, and attacked her self-worth for a decade, now positioned itself as the long-suffering employer dealing with an unreliable employee. The suspension and the smear campaign worked in tandem, one attacking her livelihood, the other destroying her reputation. It left Judy isolated, penniless, and publicly shamed, a combination designed to make her surrender completely. The message was unmistakable: you are nothing without us, and the world will see you as we choose to portray you. The suspension was a lesson she could not forget, but the addiction was a prison she could not escape. By 1949, the cycle had become a grim, predictable spiral. Judy Garland, now 27 years old, was struggling through the filming of In the Good Old Summertime. The familiar symptoms returned: the crippling anxiety, the inability to sleep without chemical aid, the sheer terror of facing the cameras. Her behavior, a direct product of the studio's own pharmacological management, was once again labeled as unprofessional and disruptive. To Louis B. Mayer, this was not a medical emergency he had helped create. It was an act of corporate treason. His solution was not to provide support, but to enact a terrifying form of punishment disguised as care. He forced Judy to check into the Austin Riggs Center, a private psychiatric facility in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. This was not presented as a choice or a compassionate intervention. It was an ultimatum, a stark demonstration of his ultimate power over her life. Go willingly to the institution or face permanent termination and the complete destruction of her career. It was containment dressed up as rehabilitation, a way to remove a problematic asset from the lot while sending a chilling message to every other star under contract. The underlying threat was clear. If you break under the pressure we apply, we will not help you heal, we will have you committed. At Austin Riggs, Judy was diagnosed with what was termed emotional instability. The label was a clinical simplification of a decade of systemic abuse. Her instability was the direct, logical outcome of being fed amphetamines and barbiturates since adolescence, of being told she was ugly and worthless by the father figure she depended on, of working 18-hour days with no reprieve. The diagnosis placed the pathology entirely within her, framing her as the broken component, while absolving the system that had deliberately fractured her. The experience inside the facility was itself traumatic. She was isolated from her family and the world, subjected to a strict, institutional routine. For a woman whose entire life had been a performance under the tightest control, this new form of control, cold and clinical, felt like a different kind of cage. Reports suggest she received insulin shock therapy, a brutal and now discredited treatment that induced comas, causing severe memory loss and disorientation. This was not healing. It was a further assault on a nervous system already pushed to its absolute limit. The forced stay at Austin Riggs represented the final, horrifying logic of Mayer's ownership. When the product he had manufactured began to malfunction from overuse, his response was to send it away for repair under the harshest possible terms. A repair meant to frighten it back into compliance rather than restore its health. It was the ultimate act of gaslighting, convincing the world and trying to convince Judy herself that the problem was her own fragile mind, not the ruthless machine that had spent 15 years grinding it down. The institution did not fix her. It merely contained the problem until the studio decided what to do with it. When Judy Garland returned from Austin Riggs, the atmosphere at MGM had shifted from paternalistic control to cold, corporate impatience. The year was 1950, and the once indispensable star was now viewed as a high-risk, high-maintenance liability. The suspensions had piled up. The delays on films like Annie, Get Your Gun had cost the studio a fortune, and Louis B. Mayer's patience, never deep to begin with, had evaporated entirely. The final break was not a dramatic confrontation, but a bureaucratic severance. After 15 years, countless hits, and immeasurable profit, Metro-Gold, when Mayer simply terminated her contract. The official reasons cited her unreliability, a label they themselves had crafted and cemented in the public mind. There was no gold watch, no farewell party, no thank you for the magic. For Judy, this was not a liberation. It was the ultimate rejection, a confirmation of every poisonous seed Mayer had planted in her childhood. The man who had called himself her father, the studio he called a family, had finally declared her unwanted. They had taken a 13-year-old girl, molded her, medicated her, worked her to the bone, and the moment the machinery began to falter from that very treatment, they discarded the broken part. Imagine the psychological whiplash. Her entire identity since adolescence was Judy Garland, MGM star. Every ounce of her worth had been tied to that lot, that soundstage, that approval. Now, with a stroke of a pen, it was gone. The cage door was open, but she had been inside for so long she no longer knew how to fly. The outside world held no safety net, only the echo of their verdict: difficult, unreliable, finished. The family that raised her had thrown her out, and in doing so, they seemed to prove their most devastating lie true, that without them, she was nothing. This abandonment would shape the rest of her life, fueling a desperate need to prove she was still wanted, still lovable, on every stage she could find. Freedom from the studio did not mean freedom from the damage it had done. The patterns of trauma imprinted on Judy Garland by Louis B. Mayer and MGM became a blueprint for her adult life, a script she could not stop performing. Her desperate search for a stable, loving authority figure she could trust immediately translated into a series of tumultuous marriages, each echoing the toxic dynamics of the studio lot. Her relationship with director Vincent Minnelli, which began on the set of Meet Me in St. Louis, seemed at first like a perfect fairy tale. Here was a brilliant, sensitive artist who saw her talent and nurtured it, guiding her to an Academy Award-nominated performance in The Clock. He represented the creative father figure Mayer never was. They married and had a daughter, Lisa, creating a brief period of domestic happiness, but the underlying instability could not be held at bay. Minnelli, while kind, was not equipped to handle the severe chemical dependencies and profound insecurities the studio system had baked into his wife. The marriage crumbled under the weight of her addictions and his own passive nature, ending after just 5 years. It was a painful repetition, finding a savior only to discover he was just another man who could not fix the deep cracks in her foundation. Her next major partnership, with producer Sid Luft, was a different kind of echo. If Minnelli reflected the longing for a gentle patriarch, Luft mirrored the combative, deal-making energy of Louis B. Mayer himself, Luft was a forceful, rough-around, the-edges manager who fought fiercely for her career, famously engineering her triumphant comeback at the Palace Theater and producing her iconic film, A Star is Born. He provided the aggressive protection she felt she needed in a cutthroat industry. Yet this relationship, too, was stormy and marked by intense conflict, financial chaos, and mutual dependency. Luft managed her affairs, but their lives were a roller coaster of lawsuits, screaming matches, and temporary reconciliations. In both marriages, and in others that followed, the same themes played out: a frantic search for someone who could simultaneously offer unconditional love and take control of the terrifying chaos of her life, a hope that always ended in disillusionment. She was forever seeking the perfect parent in a partner, a doomed endeavor that left her feeling abandoned again and again. Professionally, Her battles were fought in the harsh light of the public eye. The addictions MGM doctors had initiated became a lifelong war. Her struggles with pills and alcohol were not a secret. They were front-page news. Performances were sometimes canceled at the last minute, leading to lawsuits and further damage to her reputation. The anxiety instilled in her as a teenager, the terror that her voice would fail and she would be worthless, metastasized into crippling stage fright. Yet, paradoxically, the stage was also the only place she felt truly alive and loved. This created a brutal cycle. She feared performing, but needed the roar of the audience to silence the critical voice of Louis B. A mayor that still lived in her head. Her work ethic, forged in the fire of 18-hour days, became a compulsion. She would push herself to the brink, scheduling exhausting concert tours and demanding television specials, as if to prove over and over that she was not unreliable, that she was worthy of the adoration. The financial literacy she was never taught at MGM haunted her. Despite earning millions during her comeback years, money slipped through her fingers, managed by others or spent in attempts to fill the emotional void. She faced crippling tax debts and declared bankruptcy, a shocking fall for a woman whose voice had once funded a studio empire. Every aspect of her adult life traced back to the lessons learned in that gilded cage. The need for validation made her vulnerable to anyone who offered praise. The fear of abandonment caused her to cling too tightly or push people away preemptively. The chemical crutch became the only tool she knew to manage the unbearable pressure of simply being Judy Garland. She was a survivor, yes, and her resilience in forging a legendary concert career is a testament to her incredible strength. But the ghost of the studio followed her into every dressing room, every marriage, every solitary moment. The tragedy is that Louis B., Mayer's most enduring creation, was not the star, but the wounded woman inside her, forever seeking a home over a rainbow that always seemed to vanish just as she reached for it. Louis B. Mayer left MGM not in disgrace, but in a blaze of golden parachutes and industry accolades. His grip on the studio finally loosened in the early 1950s, not due to any scandal over his treatment of stars, but because of a corporate power struggle. He was forced out in a boardroom coup, yet his exit was cushioned by a severance package worth millions, a final, staggering payout for a lifetime of building the dream factory. He retired to a life of immense luxury, dividing his time between a Beverly Hills mansion and an East Coast estate, surrounded by the wealth his system had generated. When he died of leukemia in October 1957, the obituaries were unanimous. He was eulogized as the last of the great movie moguls, a visionary pioneer who had shaped the very art of cinema and given the world its brightest stars. The newspapers printed glowing tributes from politicians and industry titans, celebrating his genius and his patriotism. There was no asterisk, no footnote about the broken lives that were part of his assembly line. The narrative of Louis B. Mayer was carefully preserved, the myth of the benevolent patriarch intact. In death, he was absolved. Contrast this with the woman whose talent had funded so much of that legacy. In 1957, Judy Garland was fighting for her career and her sanity. She was grappling with failed marriages, battling addiction, and facing financial ruin, all while trying to be a mother to her young children. As the industry mourned Mayer, Judy was preparing for another grueling concert tour, chasing the applause that could briefly quiet the voice of the man now being buried as a legend. The dichotomy is staggering. One died a celebrated king, the other lived as a struggling survivor of his kingdom. This was not a coincidence, but the direct result of a system engineered to protect power at all costs. The studio system, in the wider culture of Hollywood, operated on a code of silence. What happened on the lot stayed on the lot. The doctors who prescribed the pills were studio employees. The publicists who crafted the smear campaigns were on the studio payroll. The journalists who printed the stories relied on studio access. Everyone had a vested interest in maintaining the glorious facade. Abuse was reframed as tough love, a necessary part of sculpting a star. The relentless pressure was called work ethic. The chemical dependency was dismissed as a personal weakness, never a corporate strategy. Powerful men like Mayer were shielded by their success, their contributions deemed too valuable to tarnish with uncomfortable truths about their methods. The suffering of individuals, even someone as famous as Judy Garland, was considered an unfortunate but acceptable cost of doing business, a private tragedy to be hidden behind the glittering public image. The phrase star-making became a euphemism, a sanitized term that erased the reality of psychological manipulation, forced medication, and financial bondage. It allowed the world to enjoy the beautiful product without ever having to consider the brutal process of its creation. Mayer's legacy, therefore, is a dual one. He helped build an iconic era of American film, a catalog of movies that still bring joy to millions. But he also perfected a machinery of human exploitation, a model where art was born from profound suffering and where the architect of that suffering faced no reckoning. His story forces a difficult question. How do we reconcile glorious art with the inglorious, often hidden means of its production? Can we truly appreciate the dream without acknowledging the nightmare that sometimes forged it? Judy Garland's suffering was a symptom, not an isolated tragedy. The machinery Louis B. Mayer perfected at MGM was applied, in varying degrees, to countless other young talents trapped within the golden age of Hollywood. Their stories form a chilling chorus. A pattern that reveals Judy's ordeal was not a unique failure of care, but a standard operating procedure for handling vulnerable, profitable assets. Take Mickey Rooney, Judy's frequent on-screen partner and MGM's top box office star for years. Like Judy, he was a child of vaudeville thrust into the studio system. And like Judy, he was fed amphetamines by studio doctors to maintain his frenetic, all-American energy through endless films and promotional tours. The boy who seemed to be a boundless fountain of vitality was, in reality, another child running on pharmaceutical fuel, his natural rhythms destroyed for the sake of the schedule. His later life struggles with addiction and financial ruin mirror the long-term cost of that early chemical management. Then consider Shirley Temple, the dimpled darling of 20th century Fox. While her public image was one of impeccable sweetness, her memoir revealed a darker side to her childhood stardom. She described a profound loneliness and a constant, exhausting performance for the cameras, where her every expression and word were tightly controlled by adults focused on the bottom line. Her mother, much like Judy's, was a constant, ambitious presence, and the financial structure ensured the child star saw little of the fortune she generated. The pressure to remain the perfect, ageless symbol of hope during the Great Depression was an immense weight for small shoulders to carry. These names, and many others like Deanna Durbin or the tragic figure of child star Bobby Driscoll, illustrate a systemic truth. The studio model viewed children not as minors to be protected, but as commercial properties to be optimized. When a young actor showed fatigue, the solution was not rest, it was a pill. When they showed normal adolescent rebellion or emotional growing pains, it was framed as unprofessionalism. Their earnings were held in trust accounts, often mismanaged or siphoned away by parents or studios, leaving many with nothing when their youthful appeal faded. This context does not diminish Judy Garland's particular pain. It deepens our understanding of it. Her case stands as one of the most severe because the combination of factors was uniquely brutal. The intensity of Mayer's psychological manipulation, the early and relentless chemical intervention, the sheer magnitude of her talent, which made her exponentially more valuable and thus more exploited. She was the system's most prized canary in the coal mine, and her collapse was the most spectacular. Recognizing this pattern forces us to shift our perspective. We can no longer see Judy's story as a singular, shocking aberration, but as the logical extreme of a business built on consuming the very youth it sold to the world. The tragedy of Judy Garland becomes the tragedy of an entire generation of children who performed our dreams, while theirs were systematically dismantled in the name of profit. This was not merely the misdeeds of one powerful man, but the calculated ethic of an entire industry wearing a mask of glamour. For decades, the story of Judy Garland was told as a cautionary tale of personal collapse. She was the archetypal tragic star, a narrative that focused on her battles with pills, her tumultuous marriages, and her professional unreliability. This framing placed the responsibility squarely on Judy's own shoulders, as if her struggles were a moral failing or a weakness of character, the inevitable crash after too much fame. It was a story that, however sad, conveniently absolved the powerful system that created the conditions for her suffering. But a modern reckoning has fundamentally shifted that narrative. Today, we no longer see just the star who fell. We see the child who was systematically broken. Contemporary biographies, documentaries, and cultural critics have meticulously connected the dots, reframing her entire life through the explicit lens of prolonged institutional abuse. Works like the documentary Judy Garland, by myself, and biographies such as Gerald Clark's Get Happy do not shy away from the grim details. They present the evidence clearly. The studio-mandated pill regimen begun in adolescence, the psychological warfare waged by Louis B. Mayer, the financial bondage of her contract, the forced institutionalization. The cause and effect is now undeniable. Her later life addictions are not the origin of her tragedy, they are the symptom. Her anxiety and insecurities are not innate flaws, they are the harvest of seeds planted by the studio. This shift in perspective is profound. It moves Judy Garland from being a case study in personal downfall to being one of Hollywood's most prominent victims of a predatory corporate machine. This re-examination did not occur in a vacuum. It was catalyzed, in large part, by the rise of the Me Too movement. While Me Too initially focused on sexual predation, its core ethos sparked a wider cultural fire, a demand to re-evaluate history through a lens of power imbalance and systemic accountability. It gave us the language and the courage to look back at old stories and ask new, uncomfortable questions. Who held the power? Who was silenced? What systems were in place to protect abusers and discredit victims? Judy Garland's story is a perfect pre-Me Too case study. The powerful man was not a lone predator in a hotel room. He was the head of a studio. The abuse was not a single violent act, but a slow, legal, and medically sanctioned process that spanned her entire formative years. The silencing was achieved not through a direct threat, but through contract law, smear campaigns, and the total control of the public narrative. Me Too taught us to recognize patterns of coercion that are not always overtly sexual, but are always about the exploitation of vulnerability. It empowered us to hold the entire system accountable, not just the individual at the top. We now see Louis B. Mayer not merely as a tough boss or a creative genius, but as the architect of a cruel regime. We see the studio doctors not as caregivers, but as accomplices. We see the publicity department not as image makers, but as propagandists. This modern lens does not diminish Judy Garland's strength or talent. It magnifies it. To have survived that system, to have clawed her way back to the stage time and again, is not a sign of instability, but a testament of breathtaking resilience. The new narrative asks us to listen to her story not as gossip, but as testimony. It challenges us to look past the glittering end product of classic cinema and see the human cost of its creation. The question is no longer what was wrong with Judy Garland, but what was wrong with the world that made her. Her voice remains a haunting echo of both magic and melancholy. Judy Garland's legacy is a complex, double-edged monument in our cultural memory, a testament to both the heights of artistic genius and the depths of human exploitation. On one side stands the immortal icon, the woman whose performances continue to define an era. The trembling vulnerability in Over the Rainbow is not just a song from a movie. It is a universal anthem of longing, a piece of raw emotional truth that resonates across generations. Her later concert years revealed a different kind of power, a survivor's command of the stage where every note seemed carved from lived experience. She became more than a singer. She became a symbol of resilience, a figure who, despite being broken by the system, kept finding the strength to return and offer her gift. For the LGBTQ+ community in particular, her struggles and her defiant comebacks made her an early and enduring icon of survival against the odds, a star whose understanding of pain made her a beacon of empathy. This is the Judy Garland we celebrate, the artist whose work is timeless. Yet her story casts a long, dark shadow that shapes how we view fame itself. Judy Garland's life became the ultimate cautionary tale, the blueprint for the phrase destroyed by Hollywood. Her very name evokes a specific tragedy, the bright-eyed child star consumed by the machine. This narrative forced a painful public conversation. It made audiences and eventually lawmakers question the glittering facade. What price are we willing to let a child pay for our entertainment? Her ordeal, alongside the struggles of other studio-era children, provided a powerful human face for advocacy. It contributed directly to a slow but significant shift in industry practices. The concept of the Coogan Law, named for child star Jackie Coogan, whose earnings were squandered by his parents, gained traction. These laws, which mandate that a portion of a minor performer's earnings be placed in a protected trust, were strengthened and expanded in spirit by the specter of Judy's financial ruin. Her story underscored the necessity of on-set teachers, welfare workers, and strict limits on working hours for children, reforms designed to prevent the kind of relentless, education-less grind she endured. The cautionary tale extends beyond legal protections into our very consciousness. Now, when we see a phenomenally talented child on a screen or a stage, Judy Garland's ghost whispers in our collective ear. We watch with a mixture of awe and anxiety, hoping the support system around them is genuine, fearing the flash of too mature sadness in a young eye. We have learned through her sacrifice to be skeptical of the flawless, manufactured image. Her tragedy taught us that extraordinary talent in a child requires extraordinary protection, not exploitation. So her legacy lives in this dual form, in the timeless joy of her art, and in the sobering regulations that strive to protect the children who make art today. She is both the eternal star and the shattered mirror that forced Hollywood to glance, however briefly, at its own reflection. The rainbow she sang about remains a powerful symbol of hope, but her life reminds us that the path to it should never again be paved with pills and punishment. That little girl looking through the window never got to go inside. Judy Garland's own words provide the most piercing testimony of all, a direct line to the unhealed wound that fame could never bandage. In a 1963 television interview, she offered a glimpse into her lifelong sense of dislocation, saying, "I have never looked upon myself as a star. In my heart, I've always been a little girl looking through the window of a candy store." This was not a charming metaphor, it was a stark confession. The woman who had everything the world thought she could want, adoration, wealth, legendary status, still felt like an outsider, forever separated from the sweetness of a normal life. The candy store was the world of simple, carefree childhood, of unconditional love, of safety and stability. All the things the studio system had stolen from her the moment she signed her contract. She remained that perpetual child, nose pressed against the glass, watching others enjoy what she was told to perform for them. This profound alienation echoed in other attempts to articulate her pain. She spoke of the relentless pressure of being treated as a commodity rather than a person. In a moment of raw honesty, she once said, "If I'm such a legend, then why am I so lonely?" Let me tell you, legends are all very well if you've got somebody around you who loves you. Here, she dismantled the entire myth of stardom that had been sold to her and to the public. The legend was a product, a brand, a hollow shell that provided no comfort in the dark. The love she craved was the very thing the system had stripped away, replacing genuine connection with contractual obligation and the fickle applause of strangers. Yet when she tried to tell this story, the world often refused to listen in the way she needed. Her interviews were frequently framed by hosts and editors as sensational glimpses into the turmoil of a tragic star, focusing on the drama of her addictions or her romantic life rather than the systemic causes. A candid moment about her exhaustion or her fears would be clipped and repackaged as another episode in the Judy Garland saga, feeding the very narrative of instability that MGM had crafted. Even her triumphant comeback at the Palace Theater, while a testament to her indomitable spirit, was itself a performance. The audience came to see the legend conquer her demons, not necessarily to understand the man who created them. The press, trained by decades of studio manipulation, often reduced her complexity to a simple binary. She was either a brilliant performer or a heartbreaking mess. They rarely connected the dots she so clearly laid out, because doing so would have required indicting the entire Hollywood power structure that many of them relied upon for access. So her voice, that magnificent instrument of song, struggled to be heard as a voice of testimony. She was telling the truth about her life, but the world, still enchanted by the myth of the star-making machine, kept trying to fit her words into a pre-written script of personal tragedy. The little girl at the window was speaking, but too many were only interested in the reflection of the star. Her voice gave us magic, but the price was her entire self. Judy Garland's journey is the archetypal Hollywood tragedy, a devastating arc from a girl overflowing with raw talent and dreams to a woman forever shadowed by the machinery that built her fame. We followed a child who loved the spotlight into a gilded cage, where her every breath was regulated by the man who owned her contract, Louis B. Mayer's abuse was not a single act of cruelty, but a sustained, systemic assault on every facet of her being. It was chemical, with doctors turning a teenager into a dependent patient to meet production schedules. It was psychological, with calculated insults designed to shatter her self-worth and ensure her dependence. It was financial, with a contract that bound her in perpetual debt, making true freedom an economic impossibility. And it was physical, with garments that constrained her natural form and schedules that pushed a young body far beyond its limits. This multi-pronged attack left wounds that never healed, transforming natural nervousness into crippling fear and a need for love into a pattern of desperate relationships. The brilliant performer the world adored was, in private, the little girl forever outside the candy store window, yearning for a sweetness fame could never provide. Her story forces a difficult but essential reflection. The entertainment we cherish, the classic films that define an era, often came at a human cost that was deliberately hidden behind the glamour. Judy Garland's life is a stark reminder to look beyond the icon to the vulnerable person behind it, to question the systems that produce our culture, and to fiercely protect the talented and young from those who would exploit their gifts. As the final curtain falls on this story, we are left to wonder about the other tragedies written into Hollywood's golden age. Which hidden stories of the silver screen do you think deserve to be told? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to join us for more deep dives into history's most compelling and concealed narratives, be sure to subscribe.